Buenos días a todos y a todas.
Hello and good morning. We are thrilled to welcome you this morning to this seminar on industrial hemp. This is a seminar held between the UPC Diàlegs session, which consists of 4 seminars. This is the first one. We're happy to hold this seminar today at the Agropolis, here in front of a hemp field outside Barcelona. My name is Joan Simó. I am a biologist and agricultural engineer at the Technical University of Catalonia. And I'd like to introduce my colleagues. To my right, Gil Gorks, Martí Cannabis, John Paul Vilellas, Iker Val, and Ramon Valenveras, excuse me. And this is our first seminar. We will be giving a few brief talks and then have a roundtable discussion where we can discuss different issues. And I would invite all of you to send us your questions and remarks on our Twitter account. 2 hashtags there, UPC Diàlegs and Cannabis UPC, and the chat room for this session that you can also use for your questions and remarks. We have colleagues who are watching those, and you'll be able to get those across to us as you send them in. So without any further ado, let me introduce the people who are going to be speaking this morning. We're happy to have Francesc Torres, the rector of the Technical University of Catalonia, and let's give him the floor at this time. Ms. Elisenda Guillaumes, Director General of Agriculture and Livestock Farming of the Autonomous Government of Catalonia. Ms. Ana Gras, Director of the Agricultural School of Barcelona. Jordi Amingué, colleagues from the university, ladies and gentlemen, audience members, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you to this seminar talking about 3 recent initiatives that will mark our contribution as a university to the project we're discussing today, September 17th, at the Agropolis Center here in Viladecans. We're here presenting the UPC Diàlegs, the agricultural dialogue sessions organized around the agricultural sector to address the challenges that we face today to discuss future solutions through dialogues among experts. Our agricultural food sector is one of the main economic drivers of this country. The Technical University of Catalonia wants to be a key player in research, training, experience, and knowledge conveyance in this field. Within this context and within the UPC Diàlegs, in the midst of the pandemic, and led by our Director of Knowledge Transfer, Jordi Amingué, we are approaching a new cycle of dialogues around the agricultural food sector. Second, we would like to draw attention to our UPC Valenveras Hub, a partnership among the institutions to provide Valenveras with access to talent, knowledge, and innovation, so-called open innovation, within our UPC Technical University community. This hub is conceived as a working environment led and coordinated by UPC innovation engineers and technicians who will supervise the implementation of the different programs that Valenveras will be behind. The directors of this hub are being consolidated with the presence of Valenveras today here at the Agropolis Center. And then the Cannabis UPC Hub. The growing of cannabis for industrial reasons provides many opportunities for economic, agricultural, and other uses, with many applications from the pharmaceutical industry, textile industry, but also for construction, the automotive industry, energy, and obviously agricultural food. For this reason, at the Technical University, and using our new partnership with Valenveras, we want to promote the Cannabis Hub UPC. This is a hub of hubs, if you will. It's a new concept that is attempting to become a knowledge pool, but also a space where we can offer services and resources for the companies that make it up, as well as the institutions and different research groups. So, with the UPC Diàlegs, the Valenveras Hub, and the Cannabis Hub UPC, we are in a prime position to share knowledge on this first, seminar of hemp in Catalonia, which we hope will be a success. We are willing to offer our experience and solvency in the sector, and the Rector's Office can only support all of these proposals. I'm very grateful to all of the organizers, speakers, and participants for their coordination, assistance, and support. Thank you very much, and I wish you every success. Thank you very much, Rector. We'll now hear from the Director General of Agriculture and Livestock Farming of the Government of Catalonia, Welcome to this first session on industrial hemp in Catalonia. First, I would like to thank the organizers of the cycle of dialogues, the agricultural food dialogues, for attaching value to this very important sector. The agricultural food sector is one of the drivers of this country's economy. Despite the pandemic, we have seen how the food sector, the food industry, is an essential need. In fact, I believe that society in general has realized just how valuable this sector is because of the pandemic. When it comes to hemp, it is a crop that in recent years has grown with increasing demand. In 2015, there were a mere 6 hectares being grown, and by last year we were up to 200 hectares. This year we've received applications for 100 hectares more. The reason why this crop is so interesting are many, and some of them will be discussed today. The uses that this crop can be put to are very diverse, from textile fiber to pulp for paper production, essential oils, but also medicinal and cosmetic applications. And agronomically, it has a very low level of inputs such as insecticides and fertilizers, which makes it a very interesting crop to protect the environment, which today is very relevant, especially when it comes to the sensitivity that we all have about climate change. At my ministry, we have detected the interest in this crop, not just because of the increased hectares, but other queries about the legal and other requisites for this crop. With the growing of this crop, we do run the risk of it being confused with marijuana, and we must do things very well to avoid that. We must consider that if the ultimate purpose is fiber or grain for industrial purposes, the competency for this is the Ministry of Agriculture, which I preside. But if the growing of cannabis is for any other purpose, the competency belongs to the Spanish Agency of Medicines and Health Products. In any event, we must be very careful to use the varieties that are listed in the Spanish Registry of Commercial Crops or that of the European Union. All of these varieties have a THC content below 0.2%, and they must comply with the legislation in force. And we hope that during today's seminar and some of the talks that you will be participating in, all of these matters can be clarified, all of these questions that emerge, especially when it comes to legal requisites. We hope that today's seminar will help you to expand your knowledge for all of us when it comes to this crop. And even though it is a crop with a very ancient history, as we're seeing today, it has a very important growth potential today in our country. Therefore, it is always a good idea to debate the agricultural food sector and take into account all of the research, the information being generated, the training and knowledge transfer that is going on to make the primary sector a very powerful one with a positive future outlook. Thank you very much. Thank you, Elisenda. There are indeed many topics to address, as we will see throughout today. And finally, we will speak to Ana Gras, Director of the School of Agriculture at the Technical University of Catalonia, who will give us a bit of the status quo when it comes to hemp in Catalonia. Thank you very much, Joan, for the opportunity to be here today at this seminar about industrial hemp in Catalonia. Thank you to our Director General of Agriculture and Livestock Farming, Catalonia, Elisenda Guillamas, and the Rector of the Technical University of Catalonia for his opening message this morning at this seminar. We are the Agricultural and Food Engineering School, as well as Biosystems School of Barcelona. We've just premiered this new name a few days ago but up until just a few days ago, we were the School of Agriculture of the Technical University of Catalonia. We have a very long history in education and training in the food and agricultural sectors, and we have a very broad approach to education and research in agriculture. As the needs of the food and agricultural sectors are diverse and changing and require a great many multidisciplinary tools. Our approach has always included training, education as a university, school, but we also want to provide knowledge. We want to contribute technology and solutions to the sector that we work for, the food and agricultural sector in this case. Therefore, at the Technical University of Catalonia, we have two different points at which we carry out our activity. One is the school that is on site of the Baixo Llobregat campus in Castelldefels, and also here where we are today, the Agropolis facility. Agropolis was opened in the 2009-2010 school year, so it's pretty new. And its mission is to conduct the research relative to the food and agricultural sectors. That is its mission. Today, it goes beyond a mere research center because we can also carry out much of our teaching activity here. Logically, the first transfer that we do from the university is to our students. Therefore, our doors are open. The doors of Agropolis are open for their education, for them to do their theses, master's projects, and also PhDs. The facility here, Agropolis, where we are today, has, as you see, many fields, 9 hectares worth, divided along the Filipinas Road. But there's also a very important crop activity, as you see, behind me. We also have greenhouses, a glass greenhouse. We have plastic tunnels under which different research activities are carried out inside them as well as outside them in the fields. We have a machinery room where a research group is conducting projects on precision agriculture, developing prototypes for phytosanitary applications. In our outdoor fields, we have groups working on genetic improvement to improve green vegetable varieties, improving their taste and culinary properties. Also, phytopathology is another area we're working on with nematodes prevention. Another area is the metabolization of regenerated water in peri-urban areas that can be used for watering, as can be used in the soil and on the plants, and on and on. We have many projects going on that are relative to the agricultural food sector. And we can also add other fields of research that are going on here, such as the environmental aspects. That's because Agropolis not only hosts research groups that are physically present at the School of Agriculture, but we also work with other research groups from other schools, from other research centers, from the Technical University of Catalonia, such as those that are working on environmental engineering. Having said all that, I would like to speak to today's agenda. Today is a great example of our will to host companies that want to cooperate and participate in our research activity. It's also a good example of how we can integrate research into the solutions that we provide for companies to make the most of our talent that our students have, as well as the research capability of our professors and researchers. What you'll see today is a good example of all this, and I'm happy to say that many students, many business owners and researchers who have been students of our schools and who return and trust us to carry out research for them, further strengthening the ties that bind among us. So many of those who are here today have been students in our classrooms, alumni of the School of Agriculture working here today, reinforcing the whole mission of cooperation and collaboration that we have at the university, returning to the productive sector, part of our knowledge and findings, and also making the most of the talent that our students have who want to get involved in experimentation, research, and knowledge transfer. So, without any further ado, I would just like to wish you a very fruitful seminar. I hope that you make the most of today. It's a beautiful day out here. It's a bit warm, very humid. The rain is on the way, according to the forecast, but I hope you do have a good seminar and that it be very fruitful for all of you. And at the same time, that you get a glimpse of the entire cycle of the educational aspects and every implication of hemp crops, growing hemp in Catalonia for industrial or pharmacological applications, as is relevant for this crop. So, again, I wish you the best of days and that you enjoy your time here at our facility. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. And let me remind you of two matters when it comes to our communications. It's very interesting that you have the opportunity to participate in the seminar. You have the hashtags Cannabis, UPC, and Diàlegs Agroalimentaris. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors today. Without them, it's impossible to hold these events, so let me remind you about them. And I hope that you will take that into account as you see them on the screen. So, moving on to our speakers. First from Gilles Gorks. Gilles Gorks is a professor of the School of Agriculture. He is an agricultural professor. He studied at the University of Lleida. His research field is focused on crop agronomy, and he has a great experience in hemp, and he's going to talk to us about that today, giving us a current overview and a future outlook. Gilles, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, and good morning to one and all, those of you who are present and those who are following online. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this session, and Joan Simó and Rubén Valenzuela, who boosted this session especially. It's a pleasure for me to be here today talking about hemp. Next slide, please. First of all, why hemp? Well, because this is a plant that you can use at its fullest. You can have fiber, grain, other active ingredients, and you can obtain lots of sustainable products from it, or at least in a more sustainable way compared to the alternatives, such as soy or cotton. It's also the most resistant fiber, or almost the most resistant fiber that we can produce in weather such as here in Europe, and it's one of the few that we can produce. And agri-environmentally, it is benign with low inputs and low impact. The truth is, though, that we're lacking technology, and we also need to clarify the regulation to make the most of its potentiality. The difference between the industrial hemp and cannabis, it's basically the THC level. In hemp, legislation says at the EU level it should be less than 0.2%, although this can vary depending on the country. But the same variety of hemp, depending on the way it is grown, low density or not, it will have a different it will have a very similar appearance to cannabis. So it's different species, different contents, but the main difference would be summarized in THC. Hemp was created in Central Asia at the beginning, and from there it went all over the world, and now it is grown everywhere up to the polar areas too. And At a certain point in history, it had a very important role, close to the role that oil has nowadays. If you have a look at the image here on the left, this is the monument to Christophorus Columbus in Barcelona, and there's two hemp plants there. And this is because without the fibers of this plant, we wouldn't have had the ropes and the sails, the maps, everything that enabled all of Columbus' trip. But at the beginning, there was a decline of it because of the steam machine creation, synthetic fibers, and then it became illegal, and the crops decreased until the end of last century. Handsome at the beginning, and then Jack Keever with his books, The Emperor Wears No Clothes. Well, he was talking about the importance of this plant, and he rediscovered the importance of this crop. We are increasing the growth of this plant. Lately, it has double-folded. Europe is the area where there is a greatest amount of crop, 48,000 hectares, diversified production. And close comes Canada, really focusing on grain production and also cannabinoids. And next comes the USA, although the crop has been legalized 2 years ago, very recently. In Europe, the surfaces are also increasing. Traditionally, the most important crop area is France, with 17,000, 18,000 hectares, followed by Italy, Holland, and Germany. In the case of Spain, from the 70s onwards, there's been crops of 300 up to 3,000 hectares. It was concentrated in the pre-Pyrenees area in Catalonia. It was basically for paper pulp. And then we had the agrofiber transforming plant created, and the whole crop was stopped. The whole growth was stopped, and in Spain we didn't see this growth again until 1915-16, and now there's lots of initiatives in different areas all over Spain. But the truth is that they are lacking consolidation, and they need to increase their volume for us to really talk about a really developed sector. At the beginning, we were talking about the different uses of hemp, especially the stalk. It is important to distinguish the long fiber, the one that we have at the stalk, compared to the short fiber, which is the shine, which has more of a woody appearance. And from this point onwards, we can see the long fiber and shive, and we can see that the use has been for sails, ropes, or paper traditionally, and most recently, we have a growing interest in biocomposites or insulating materials for construction. Grain is an oleaginous element that it has to it. Oil is interesting from a nutritious point of view, and also inflorescence, different parts of it. The leaves, from leaves we can extract cannabinoids, CBD as well, and other cannabinoids can be taken out from hemp, and they can be used in the medicinal sector as well as others. In Europe, fiber is basically more devoted to paper pulp. And in the latest years, we see an increase of use for biocomposites as well as insulating material. And as for chive, we can see that we can use it for cattle bed, basically for horses and also gardening, as well as construction. The grain is basically consumed as a whole, in its whole, and when it is processed, both the cake and the oil, well, that's used in the human food sector. And inflorescences are used because of as biocomponents and also biofood products. Agroculturally and environmentally speaking, it is a very interesting product. This plant structures the soil. The soil is in very good conditions. It breaks the cycle of nematodes, diseases. It eliminates bad herbs, and this is because the plant is well rooted. It can grow up to 17 centimeters per day. So there's no bad herbs that can grow around. The agronomic interest is that it is a good plant before wheat. It increases the performance of wheat, soy, and this is what we can see. We can see how there is an increase of the performance after wheat in hemp. And on the other bars, you can see just monocrops. So here we can see, and these are the results of one of the trials that we have carried out, that there's around 49% more of performance compared to wheat in monocrop. So here we can see that it is good, and there is a big increase of performance of wheat if hemp has been growth before. And here we can see that it absorbs nutrients from deep layers, nitrogen specifically. And in this figure, we can observe how the wheat in monocrop in the deeper levels, it has a concentration of nitrogen which is much higher than wheat after hemp, because hemp has already absorbed it. So it limits the potentiality that this nitrogen might have in these deeper layers to contaminate these phreatic layers. So along these lines, it is very interesting. It is also a benign crop. It is good for biodiversity. This is what we can see here in the graph on the right. Hemp is in a good position in this classification, and production absorbs CO2. So when we use hemp products, for example, for construction, this is also way of catching CO2 from a stable point of view. Here we can see these 35 kilograms of CO2 if we have this mortar wall where hemp has been used. And if we use it to substitute plastic in vehicles, we can see that it is not going to be that heavy, so we will have less consumption and less greenhouse gas effects. And towards the end, I would like to mention my point of view. Right now, the growth is really focused on the interest of cannabinoids, CBD specifically. There is an increasing demand, but there's also an increase in offer, taking into account all of the different initiatives, and also because there is a mechanization of the process. So we can see that there is pressure on prices. Prices are reduced, and probably this is what will be seen in the near future. And along these lines, there is a certain uncertainty. From a regulation point of view, we need to see how will the European Union consider CBD. Will it be noble food? Will it be considered narcotic? And also, what limits of THC will we have for these products? And the interpretations of the different member states, what will that be? So, from my point of view, I believe that right now CBD is very interesting, but focusing just on CBD and grain, which is the option that Canada chose, for me specifically, grain, I think that here in the EU, it just won't be feasible if we just use the grain in these crops, from these crops. So I believe that the important thing would be to have an approach that encompasses all of the products that can be produced out from hemp. And for me, the challenge here, if we want to understand how important the plant is as a whole, is to have good quality fiber, thin enough, flexible enough, so that we could have thin strands, spinnable strands. And to be able to achieve this and to be able to make the most and use all of the plant, we need to overcome two technical obstacles. So with cortical fiber, we are thinking about the separation of the fiber levels. So there's a biological process with fungus where we can break the peptins, and then we can have the different strands separated, and we can separate it mechanically. Right now, we do not have modern technology that helps us overcome these steps. We could have the cottonization as a possible solution. It's a chemical process, and we release all of the main fibers of hemp. It's an interesting approach, but fiber wouldn't be that resistant then, and it should have to be mixed with other fibers so that we could spin them afterwards. To overcome these steps, in the different value chain points, there are already quite a few companies working on this, producing strands, fabric. But the important thing is that, well, most of these companies are from China and other Asian countries, because here we do not have enough good quality in the fibers from a textile point of view. At any rate, this is a complex process because there's microbiologic, microagronomic processes. But I believe that here in the technical university, we're ready to face these processes. At least some of the R&D indicators of the university linked to hemp are pointing in this direction. There's quite a lot of activity. We're talking about the app. These are groups that we've been working from an agronomic point of view, technological point of view of these crops. We are focusing on the whole of the plant. And as for the identification of cannabinoids, we have the work of Francisco Xavier de las Heras. And from a fiber point of view, this is worked in textile. Diana Cayuela is working on this from the textile fiber point of view. And we also have Ms. Ardanui and Mr. Claramunt. They're working on composites of cement, mortar, including flax and hemp fibers there. And they have pointed out extraordinary progress along these lines. I have a video with me, but I think that unfortunately we're not going to be able to see it right now, but I hope I'm going to be able to show it at some point. And Basically, this is all I wanted to say. This is all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias, Jill.
Thank you for that, Jill. As you see, many topics are being brought up. I'm trying to write a list, and I still encourage you to send in your questions and remarks. We have over 200 people connected right now. We have the chat, the YouTube, and the Twitter feed, UPC Diàlegs and Cannabis UPC. Now, we'll move on to something I'm not very well versed in, but it is the legal aspects. We have Martí Cannabis, a criminal lawyer, familiar with this topic from the DMT Advocats law firm. They have offices in Mallorca and here in Barcelona. So Martí, you now have the floor. Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to thank the UPC and all of the organizers of this seminar for inviting me today. As my presentation is entitled, we'll be talking about the legal hemp business in Spain and the world, the need for modern regulation that allows us to give legal security to the industry. As our title suggests, the regulations in the EU and Spain is very confusing. Oftentimes, it leads to the public administrations to interpret the law erroneously. This causes great damage to the Spanish industry. We must remember that the different international conventions around narcotics and controlled substances regulate cannabis and its production and rule out hemp production for industrial purposes. There are many crops that are included, not just fiber and seeds. Those are just two examples. And it's also not very clear how it would be used at the horticultural level. Therefore, we believe it's urgent that we have European and Spanish legislation that will provide the industry with legal security. At the European level, we find different sets of regulations that place Spanish companies in an inferior position to be able to compete on equal terms with other companies from other countries inside the EU, such as Italy, Holland, Belgium, or the Czech Republic. The excuse that the regulators usually give is that international conventions control the flower of the cannabis plant as a controlled substance. We disagree with that. This interpretation is based on Article 1 of the definition of cannabis, defines it as its floral units. But there's an entire protocol for analysis of the STNRA 40 from 2010 from the UN, designed to clarify these confusions. When the THC is over 0.2%, it indicates that the way to discard that it is being treated as a controlled substance is its index of psychoactivity. That is a way to add the THC to the C and B, divided by a quotient, and the resulting value determines whether or not it's a controlled substance. It's an error for the authorities to control the flower as a controlled substance. That is not the case. Another example is other countries that allow trade of the flower as a substitute for tobacco and other uses, such as the example of Italy, which has a limit of THC of 0.6%. Therefore, it's not true that it's the United Nations that is requiring them to set the limit at 0.2%. It allows the states to set their own limits, in fact. Therefore, this is of key importance. Growers that can grow hemp, if they have the preliminary notification of their agricultural authorities in their area with the reporting of their cultivated surface area, etc., and the registration of their seeds, this would be viable. Even if they are registered seeds, the climatic conditions may indicate that this THC level would increase. Therefore, we must not treat growers as criminals. Criminals would never notify the authorities of their crops, where those crops are located, and all of the other information. All too often, there is deficient training and information on the part of law enforcement. As it determined that THC is over 0.2%, They considered that it's not just that the product is illegal, but they would also bring legal criminal action against the growers. The conventions that regulate the European regulations for hemp define that in the case of surpassing the 0.2% limit, a more detailed analysis must be carried out. And only in the case intentionality or bad faith is detected is when criminal action can be brought against the grower. The criminal action cannot be brought systematically, that is to say. We believe that this point is essential. The flower is not controlled as a controlled substance. Article 61 defines it, but also modified it with the 2010 protocol identifying the convention, describing hemp as a controlled substance. Other countries have other THC limits. Canada, for example, 0.3%, Switzerland, 1%, Italy, 0.6%. And they are all countries that signed the international conventions for controlled substances. Therefore, we believe that we cannot undermine the competitiveness of Spanish companies. Spain must be considered a cannabis producer, and especially at this time of economic crisis, Spain should be endowed with legal security for this sector. We must protect our growers. We must give them security. Another problem is the theft of crops. It's another problem they face. Therefore, law enforcement must take part in the protection of our growers. We must do everything we can to protect this completely legal sector. Going further into the flower, this is the most problematic area. There are a number of uses for the flower. Many Spanish companies have to produce biomass to sell it to an Italian, Swiss, or other country's company for them to make a profit on the work that has been done by Spanish growers, because their countries have regulations that allow them to process the biomass, to use the flower, and resell it. And by mutual recognition and the free movement of goods and services, these products can be returned to Spain. This has a very negative impact on the business opportunities for this sector. France is another country with a similar legal framework to Spain's. France is the largest European producer, but it impedes and limits the free movement of goods and services. A Spanish company that wants to send a product to Italy, in Italy it has 0.6% THC, but when it goes through France, France can seize these shipments and often bring criminal action against those responsible. And France is limiting in other ways their companies from working with hemp. The case CS63/18 in Aix-en-Provence from 2018 brought an action against the European Criminal Court. It's a matter of a company that made products for vaporizers with CBD. This case, which is now before the European Tribunal of Justice, can clarify all these confusing regulations that are in effect not just in Spain but other countries as well. For example, Germany, 0.2% of the flower, and CBD is allowed in cosmetics as well as liquids for smoking. In Italy, 0.6% is the limit. The flower is allowed and the oil is allowed. Belgium, 0.2% is the limit and 0.6% for flowers. Same for the Netherlands. So we believe that the European Union and the Court of Justice must set a standardization for these regulations throughout the EU to regulate all these principles and ensure the free movement of products throughout Europe. On another note, we would propose a number of measures to be taken. These would be used to solve the existing legal confusion. We must urge the authorities to enforce the laws that are derived from the UN Convention 40. Only those products with a psychoactive index above 1, not just because we say it, but it's the maximum authority for drugs, the National Council for Controlled Substances in Vienna, we must urge law enforcement agencies and our legal system to follow the terms of the Convention 1164/89 of 28 April. Here, it says that 500 samples have to be taken. The police cannot come and take the nicest flower with the most resin for their sampling, because an analysis must be conducted that is representative of the entirety of the crop. Therefore, there are some sample-taking protocols. If they're not followed, the result will not be representative of the entirety of the crop. Therefore, this sample-taking protocol from '89 was modified in 2010 through these new protocols that 30 samples would be enough. Therefore, if the protocol says that you have to take 30 samples, and we follow it, why not pay attention to the need to determine the psychoactivity index? We believe that this erroneous interpretation of the conventions causes severe damage to the Spanish growers and companies. There must also be official laboratories to conduct the analyses in accordance with the terms of these protocols. Often we find that the same sample analyzed in different laboratories gives very different results. 0.2% is such a low limit that oftentimes a product can be legal in one lab, but illegal according to another lab, and therefore the growers can be subject to criminal proceedings, as there's such a wide variability also in the sample taking and the analytical techniques. The growers that are affected by interventions that break the law can claim compensation from the state. We urge that there be enacted new regulations from with the support of the universities and growers that have been damaged by this erroneous interpretation of this international legislation. Another example is the Law 1767 on controlled substances, indicating that there will be subject to control that cannabis that can be used for controlled substances purposes, narcotic purposes. If you cannot, any hemp can be used for controlled substances according to this interpretation of the law. If the level of psychoactivity is below 1, there cannot be a controlled substance law applied to a crop that it cannot be a controlled substance. That is obvious. We also need the urgent approval of a law that will ensure modern regulation for all aspects related for non-narcotic hemp, and that public institutions pledge to defend the economic interests, not just of the large multinational pharmaceutical companies. Obviously, if there is a pharmaceutical company, they may do many positive things, but on another note, they want cannabis and CBD to be controlled as if they were medications. Obviously, there are many other uses for hemp, food, the food sector, and they've tried to conduct this through the Noble Food channel. Something of a smokescreen to keep food companies from marketing products with hemp or cannabis elements. The sector must also enact some self-regulation measures with best practices and developing a code according to which the products have what they claim to have, that there be proper labeling standards. There must also be a supervision and harmonization of the analytical methods used, as the same sample can give different results depending on what laboratory analyzes it. Last, as long as the regulatory framework is not clarified, and to avoid all of these problems related with the cultivation of flowers, we think that we must seek authorization from the Spanish Medications Agency. There is a protocol established. There has to be a dossier presented with all of the information on the grower, the owner, the province where the plot is located, and other essential information to legalize these crops, as this will allow the export of the product as well as its sale to other companies internationally, pharmaceutical companies that can later process the hemp. Therefore, we should not pursue the companies that produce flowers, because to produce seeds, you have to produce flowers. And nowhere does it say that flowers should be subject to the control of a controlled substance if its psychoactive index is below the threshold. Under no circumstances should the flowers be destroyed. So the ambiguity of the international legislation, but also the national legislation and their lack of clarity is a problem that is all too real. Therefore, we urge all of you to work together to develop new regulations that respect the rights of growers throughout Spain. Thank you very much.
Intensa charla, pero muy interesante.
Thank you very much. It's been very intense, but very interesting. This is a topic that we've already seen, that there's great interest in this topic. So thank you, Martí. I'm sure we'll be able to have some questions in the roundtable. Again, I'm sorry, but I will repeat. Communication means that we have. It's important. It's an important part of the session. That's why we're doing it live. We have the YouTube chat and 2 hashtags in Twitter, Canales UPC, UPC Diàlegs. And also in Agrotech UPC, our Twitter account, you will see a couple of surveys that we launched a few days ago, and I would like you to use them because we're going to use them later on in the roundtable. We'll continue. We will now hear from Jean-Paul Vilellas, one of the ex-students, as Ana Gras was saying in the presentation of the session. So she will be pleased to see him here. He's a member and founder of HEMCAT Consulting. He's an agronomist specialist, and he will talk about challenges and opportunities today. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizers for trusting me for this presentation, and I would like to thank the audience, both physical and online. I'm here to talk about the hemp production, to make the most of it in its use, new systems. It is going from the traditional crop to the new paradigm, the characteristics of the models, and I will give you some examples with the challenges and opportunities that we've been facing in our path. We are a group of experts, and we have a common interest in this crop, and we also have the demand of technical services. So we created this technical advisory company to meet this demand. We offer a whole service because this is a new crop for many people who want to undertake this initiative. And we help people from the very beginning, feasibility studies, the productive model, and everything that we need to regulate a crop, as we've heard before in the previous speech. Because we need to have a statement where we see the surface, how many plants, where it is placed, and also the management of fertilizers, plant production products, and also we help the farmers in all of the process through regular visits. We are an advisory company, so basically we answer questions. And I've gathered here the most common questions so that later on in the roundtable we can add further questions. And also, this is a good way of framing the roundtable. Who can grow hemp? Hemp is like any other agricultural crop. So if you're a farmer or if you're an agricultural company, and if you already have the necessary documents to regulate it, we could already grow hemp. Where can we grow it? Well, it is an agricultural product, so it has to be in agricultural soil. And how can we regularize the whole thing? Well, we need to inform about it in the agricultural department. We need to have a traceability of the genetics, how many hectares, the surface that it is used for growth, and then we will have it already regularized. And this information is given to the police entities too. And how many varieties can we grow? Well, this is a yearly crop, and with the new techniques and because of the things I will mention afterwards, we can have more than one cycle, up to 3 or 4 cycles, and if it's highly technified, up to 5 cycles a year. What infrastructure do we need? Well, with these more intensive crops, we need infrastructures that are not the common infrastructure that we see in the traditional hemp growth, because with the traditional systems, with a tractor and some watering system, that's enough. But if we want to move into these new modern crops, we need different infrastructure. So taking into account the present setting, as Professor Gorge has mentioned, the traditional use of hemp is fiber and also the seed, the grain. And right now, we are starting to consider new elements. Of course, fiber and grain can be used in many different sectors, but right now, we're thinking about byproducts, biomass, because of the content of CBD. So we can see right now that this crop can be quite profitable. And also, besides biomass for extraction, as we already mentioned, we have a new horizon ahead of us, which is making the most of the female flower of hemp. It has important compounds such as aroma compounds, cannabinoids, and other interesting components, and thus we can see even more profitability. Why is this a new paradigm? Because as we've been mentioning, there are new production models for these new uses, and moreover, there's new actors and agents in place. So these are people who do not necessarily have experience in hemp, and there's also new investors that do not have experience in agricultural crops in general. This is why we are offering our services to meet this demand. And we also need a new know-how, new techniques, not only agronomically speaking, but also risk evaluation, legally, etc. New trends. How can we carry out these crops? What are the differences compared to traditional crops? Well, the origin of the vegetal material, they are clones, that they come from mothers, that they are certified seeds, they are legal. And instead of seeds, we use these clones. These clones come from plants that have been selected because of its biomass production and because of the cannabinoid contents and other interests, other products. In the outside crops, the density is much less than with traditional hemp, 2,000 to 5,000 plants per hectare. And with tunnels, greenhouses, we can plant up to 5 plants per square meters. The drying process is not in the crop or in industrial ovens, but they are under more controlled conditions, like a white room. Here we can see some examples of the new production systems. Here we can see that they are more technified. On the right-hand side, we can see extraction systems, systems to force the photoperiod of the plant, controlled fertilization, controlled watering, and we also have new production models, also outside with natural cycles. As I told you before, we didn't need plastic use for the weeds nor anything to get rid of the weeds because of the density. We couldn't have weeds, but right now we are using these kinds of systems as well as localized watering systems that we didn't use in traditional systems. In traditional systems, it was more extensive watering, flooding, watering. This is more like the extensive gardening growth that we're using right now. We have intensive models, and they are not all outside. We also have semi-forced systems inside, such as tunnels or highly technified systems with photo periods, photoillumination systems, etc. These are glass greenhouses. And we also need to relate to many different agents in the process. We need to talk to the farmers, the investors, but we also need to talk to the agricultural department, and this is why sometimes they are asking for information that are more for industrial hemp, such as the density of the seeding, and this is more for subsidies. But the investors that we advise, they're not asking for these subsidies. We also talk to the police units and safety entities, and the whole thing is quite complex. Many people do not know how to react. And these crops are grown in places where all of a sudden there's a whole network of interested people, and the economy in that place is moving thanks to that. Because it's not only about the farmers, it's also about the installers, the safety companies, input companies, etc. And we have been daily facing some challenges with these crops. And we have some obstacles that we face nearly every day. First of all, because we are facing some regulation that it is not updated, because usually hemp is produced for fiber and grain. But when we talk about flour or biomass, this is not under the umbrella of the regulations. Restrictions of the percentages of THC. It's quite a complex regulation, and it is complicated for experts when we want to have maximum production of biomass with high content of interesting cannabinoids and aromatic compounds. And this is why THC is also increasing. The plant always needs to be fertilized at its limit, but we need to stick to regulation. And the same thing happens at the crop moment. So many times we do not reach the optimal maturation stage because the THC probably is going to increase. So this is why we carry out analyses throughout the whole crop cycle. Usually we do 5 analyses a week of the same samples to check the increase and to decide how to manage fertilization and how to grow the crop. So in the long run, here in Spain, we have industrial growth of the varieties that are authorized by the EU, or medicinal cannabis. We need to work with the medicament agency for that. So there's no flexibility. If there's no flexibility, our competitors will grow in the biomass sector, for example, because we won't be able to compete at their level. But at the same time, and by the way, I forgot one of the most important challenges, and this is something that we face every day too. We do not have registered phytosanitary products to go against the plagues and diseases in hemp. So we need to develop genetics that can have high production of biomass and high content of interesting cannabinoids and aromatic compounds, but they should be below 0.2 of THC. Also, all of the development of agronomic technical knowledge should be used to create a regulatory framework. Also, phytosanitary products register the use and development of fertilizers so that we could boost those cannabinoids that are interesting and we could stop the THC root growth. That would be very interesting. I'm just launching this idea here. This is an opportunity in this academic sector. And also all of the agents that are linked to these kind of crops make agricultural areas that were in decline and that couldn't make ends meet, well, they could reactivate their economic region. And this is very interesting. This is why we're here, to try to boost that. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been a pleasure.
Muy interesante, van saliendo.
Thank you for that, John Paul. Many topics coming up here, and I encourage you again to participate. I won't repeat the different ways to do that. I think you can see them on screen. And we need to stay on schedule. We'll now hear from Ico Val, founder of Balotech, devoted to research of cannabis with a license from the Spanish Medicines Agency. He has been working in this sector for 20 years and in regulatory matters as well. Ikel, it's nice to have you with us today, and we look forward to your very interesting presentation. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thanks to the UPC for this event, which I think will be very educational and give us a good overview of the situation today. My presentation today, which is focused more on medicinal cannabis research and applications, going a step further from the industrial uses that we've heard about up to now. I will try to make the most of my time to discuss this very complex issue, to give you an idea of the status quo of cannabis medicinal research in Spain. Just to get started, let me give you an example. In the world, there's some 300 million cannabis users. It's one of the most widely consumed drugs worldwide. For my presentation, I was going to explore where medicinal cannabis came from, going back to over 2,000 years ago in India. Some of the first references we have, the Ayurveda system. It is a very holistic system that includes diet, the use of medicinal plants, among which hundreds or thousands of medicinal plants, cannabis is one, as well as personal, emotional, mental hygiene and care. The combination of these three axes leads to a whole concept of health. Cannabis is there as an additional element to this overall health concept. A second concept that I wanted to share with you, just to introduce the topic, is about how cannabis is a product of well-being. And this is essential. Many people do use cannabis recreationally. Under that recreational usage is a use that is meant for well-being, especially the 21st century in our global system in which we live today. So, with those two references and that conceptual framework, let me say that in Europe, more and more countries are approaching medicinal cannabis regulation. Throughout the European Union, there's much research underway on cannabis, and internationally as well. Countries such as Uruguay, Canada, the United States, Australia, and other countries have made inroads into cannabis regulation, implementing regulatory models, some of which are comprehensive, but especially for medicinal cannabis. And that is driving a great deal of research in medicinal cannabis. In Spain, the reality that we face today, we're now at 0.4% of the GNP in terms of the investment made in research. Obviously, following the health crisis, there will be a financial crisis, and there's nothing to indicate that more resources will be devoted to it. Talent flight is a reality in Spain, and though there are no resources and there is very little research activity, that is limiting development of any sector in Spain. It's fundamental to understand this. If there's no investment in research, we cannot develop, and we will not reach the coming phases of development. What are the factors that limit the research and development of cannabis in Spain? Number one, the international conventions and the limitations that they entail. That's not true not just for Spain, but internationally. This is gradually resolving itself. More countries are interpreting those international conventions in a more liberal way, regulating cannabis, and therefore allowing further research into medicinal cannabis. There's also a lack of national regulations that is in step with the 21st century in Spain, another limitation. That doesn't mean that there are no regulations in Spain. There are regulations, and there are regulations for cannabis in Spain, but determined by the narcotics law of 1977 that Martí Cannabis told us about. That entails many limitations, not just because it is a pre-constitutional or peri-constitutional law, but because it is very restrictive and is interpreted restrictively. So there is no national program for cannabis. That is another fundamental step. Germany has done that, and that's another limitation for research, and associated with our lawmakers' lack of interest in proposing new regulations. There have been a number of committees that have looked into it, but there's a great deal of pressure from civil society, the Spanish Medicinal Cannabis Association. Many people are using cannabis in Spanish society, but it's just not regulated. And within the context of industrial hemp, imagine the contradiction it would mean. Someone who was ill and used cannabis for therapeutic purposes could go to a tobacco shop and get CBD flowers, but the government does not guarantee regulated access to cannabis. It's a complete contradiction. And also, we're seeing the position of the pharmaceutical industry. Up to now, there has been something of a stigma around developing medications with cannabis in them, but there are other derivatives such as opioids that are fully implemented, regulated, and very present that are a substitute for cannabis. And we're seeing a trend now throughout Europe. Epidiolex, Sativex are the only authorized drugs authorized by the medications agencies with cannabis, and it's very limited. Also, there are synthetic cannabinoids, but their effect has proven to be very limited. So it's very clear that in order for there to be more development in medicinal cannabis, the pharmaceutical industry needs a proper regulatory framework. It needs there to be more interest and from the legislation or the law-making branch of government that laws be drawn up in step with the demands of civil society as well as other different branches of government, autonomous governments, for example. And we do observe an evolution among the projects that are being presented. The first project, the Plan for Research of 2012, the pioneering project in this regard of researching cannabis, involving a number of different companies, but in July of this year, the latest update of it that you see here on the screen, 8 companies were authorized to research with cannabis, and 4 companies authorized to produce and export. The fact that there is a national program doesn't mean that you can produce for Spain. What is produced has to be produced for export. Last year, some 70 applications were received from companies presenting technical projects to receive authorization. And as you see, a minimal number of authorizations were granted. Therefore, to get an authorization, a prior process is required, a very complex one, with a whole scientific basis, consolidated objectives with the compliance with scientific criteria. And the Spanish Medications Agency is having trouble managing all these applications. In Portugal, there's Infarma. It's a specific agency to respond to all these authorization needs, and they have the proper amount of human resources to manage the applications. In Spain, this is another limitation. The human resources very limited human resources of the Spanish Medications Agency. It's not easy to get these authorizations. It requires many elements that have to be put together to get the final approved authorization. For example, that the genetics must have a legal origin. Nowadays, that's very difficult to achieve in Spain. There's also a quality system, a traceability system that you have to carry out with some standardized work procedures. You have to define a space, specific constructed facilities where the activity is going to be carried out. You need the technical and academic profiles that support the research. Obviously, resources are necessary there to really put a research authorization into action. Obviously, these authorizations require a great deal of effort, as well as the projects themselves. And they're projects that don't have an economic return. They're focused on developing intellectual property and research in the mid and long terms. Therefore, all of these different conditions come together to truly add up to a very low number of licenses in Spain, despite the fact that it is a market, an industry, a sector that is still very small. What I'd also like to explain with this map is where we're headed in Spain with research. As some of my fellow speakers have said, we are facing many difficulties in researching on cannabis, but at the same time, there are many companies that want to do so. They may not have the right resources. It's another process that may be aided if we were to create a specific cannabis agency for Spain. And last, Balutec is working on the development of genetics. We're also working with the University of Malaga to develop molecular complexes with cannabinoids. We're also working with the University of Extremadura with in vitro technology. And we're also working with Symposium in the field of analytics. So within an authorization, all the different collaborations require those elements or organizations that collaborate to each have their own authorization. Along those lines, this is the project that we're working at Balutec with Symposium. A technological cannabis pole is being developed in Extremadura, integrating institutions, technological centers, and the companies that are interested in research. The project will be presented in the first week of October. And just as an example, which is fundamental when it comes to understanding research in this field, not just in Extremadura, but also Catalonia, Euskadi, Alicante, in Valencia, where there are the most licenses, networks are set up for researchers to boost research activities around cannabis in the agronomic side, but also the medicinal side. There's a great deal of development that is yet to do. We have scientists in Spain who are the top figures in their fields for medicinal development, and they are limited because there is no legal framework, no regulatory framework in which to do it. And that's why I want to present this case about cannabis. The technological pole that is being set up in Extremadura, it could be an example for the rest of Spain. It will be one of the axes for future regulation of cannabis in Spain. Researching is another fundamental pillar in these poles and will be key to the future of cannabis in Spain. We want to develop and offer a number of services for cannabis at the pole, aiding research activities in specific companies with technological bases. Our goal is to promote development and the comprehensive use of this crop, making use of the different crop technologies, facilitating the growth of the sector, and promoting association as a work method. As my colleague said, we face the great danger of falling behind in regulation. It's already happened for hemp. Other Western European countries have been working for 20, 25 years. They've already amortized their machinery. They have cheaper labor. They have national regulation that allows them to operate much more efficiently, and that is not the case in Spain. Obviously, we hope that a future national cannabis law will be approved, as is the case of Italy, the United States, or other countries. It's fundamental to develop these tools. Our first mission at the pole is to encourage new entrepreneurial activities, technological activity, share information and technology among our members and third parties. We're not limited just to Extremadura at the pole. It's a national, international pole. And we want to disseminate resources throughout the different fields about the achievements and possibilities of the hemp industry. Our second mission is to drive the public and private research in the different disciplines, activities, and knowledge that make up industrial cannabis as a sector. Also the training and empowerment of technicians and other professionals that can be active in this field. I could go on further. I don't know if I'm on time, but that is our message today. The great number of limitations that we face to research and develop cannabis in Spain. Hemp also has, or could have, medicinal properties, obviously, thanks to its terpenes, thanks to its cannabinoids, but it is fundamental that it have a solid regulatory framework for all of its activities, and that this generates a strong, competitive industry that is active at the international level. That should be combined with the fact that something we can observe in Europe, the great number of licenses that are already producing. But the truth is, demand is very limited. It's 15 tons for Germany. Other countries, even less. Denmark, 4 to 5 tons. We might be talking about 30 tons overall, and 100 licenses throughout Europe that have the capacity to produce 200 tons. Therefore, there is a contradiction, as there are no regulatory models that are properly implemented. And the reality is that any country that has regulated has required at least 3 years to implement the regulation. There are too many people producing and not enough people who have these medicinal needs or requirements. And if we add to the fact that the development of medicines, flowers are not considered a pharmaceutical active ingredient yet, this generates even more contradiction. So thank you very much for your attention this morning, and a warm greeting to all of you.
Thank you very much. And I will move over here because now it's my turn. Now I'm not the moderator anymore, I'm a speaker. I would like to talk about the tools that we are developing in the Technical University regarding innovation. I think that Iker's speech is really overlapping with mine. We do coincide on many topics, and I'm happy to see this because this is about finding synergies and working together. So I would like to talk about the tools that we are developing in the hemp crops. Basically, it is 2 tools. Here you have a triangle, and we had this virtuous circle in the middle. I wanted to represent the objectives of university in general. We could talk in depth on this, and here we have 3, although there's 2. The first one is what Iker mentioned, and this is should be at the core. It should be research. It's not always the case, but university is here for basic research and applied research to generate knowledge. Once we get knowledge, we need to transfer it, and there's different ways of doing that. So it's basically about generating and transferring. Innovation and technological transfer. When we talk to institutions and companies, we do that, and we also do that through education and training. Here you can see the figures on the screen. There's lots of figures here, but it's just for you to get a picture of the magnitude of the Technical University of Catalonia. 28,000 students, lots of teachers and people supporting teachers, 100 million for budget linked to projects, etc. And this is why we can end up working with different companies and patents. For this to flow, we've created the UPC Innovation Ecosystems. It's an innovation ecosystem, where we are trying to accompany the innovation process from the very beginning of a project. I have an idea, I want to do something, up to getting in touch with a multinational company or a company. So there's a long process where innovation is growing, maturing, and in this system we want to offer support in all of the different stages. And in the end we get the hub. And basically what we mean by hub is that we want to link. We want to link and unite the different elements. We have developed a tool to enable companies to have a fluid conversation with the university. The university should know about their needs, and we should also nourish ourselves from the knowledge of the company. A hub concept from July, it's the process we did with Valemberas. We are organizing this session with Valemberas. This is part of this innovation hub. And here we have the two main lines of the demands of the company. First of all, positioning. The company needs to be well positioned within the university so as to generate talent, for people to know what this company does, for students of the university to be able to go to this company, and the company could nourish itself from this talent. And then also the innovation line that I will talk about later on. This hub, and this is the global image about it, and I'm saying this just in case there's other companies interested in this. Well, we can adapt this hub to the different companies because we have different needs, so we offer different solutions. In this case, we've created three axes. On the left, as you can see in the screen, we have innovation. It's the center of competence. You know that we like using English words, but basically it's about a knowledge center so that we can do research projects to generate knowledge, as I was saying. The second axis, it's the co-creation. Basically, it's about a joint creation that we're talking about. This is an important thing that we usually forget about. Public research is very important. It should always be there, but many times companies also have great people in their research and innovation departments. And if we do not work with these people, this knowledge cannot be shared with the public research. So it's important to be able to use the talent that companies have inside within our research and development projects that we have. And finally, we could have like a loudspeaker inside the university. It's like this session. We're all here to talk about hemp, but Valemberas will be shown in the university map, and this is very positive. So as I was saying, this is a brand new innovation hub. We started in July after COVID. We've had August in between, but still we have started working hard. We have an in vitro project with researchers of the department. We also have other associates. Students are very important, and it is very important that they can do their apprenticeship or their final project in these companies. Is very interesting to us. And we also have agronomy aspects linked to Gilles Goros. You've been able to hear him before. And we also have these fields. Ruben will tell us about them afterwards. And all of these can be linked with the final projects. As Anna said, this is Agropolis. The innovation hub also makes Valemberas able to do some research here, and we also have some buildings that you cannot appreciate here, but they're just here where we can do research. We're working with Michela Birusti Foundation. We're doing this with a technical university, the City Council of Sabadell, and it's also a group here that has been created in the university, and we've started working on technology and innovation with them. We want to tackle different topics. Jill mentioned before that we have lots of people researching hemp with fabric materials. This is a company that is interested in many different fields, so this is good for us. And we want to grow and be involved in different projects of different areas. So this is our first tool, this hub that we have between the company and the university with close ties, and this is growing as time goes by. Innovation, knowledge and transfer. I want to go back to this triangle. As Iker mentioned before, he was talking about this concept too. He was talking about a pole, I was talking about a hub, and this cannabis hub that will be created here in the Technical University. We still don't have a specific date, but the idea is the same. We see that there are interesting expectations linked to these crops. It involves different areas of the sector, agricultural, food sector, and others. So we believe that research transfer is essential along these lines. But, and there's also a but linked to it, there are legal issues and there's some hurdles and obstacles that are linked to different experiments. And he was talking about the need to doing this jointly. And I wanted to say the same thing. We want to involve different agents and sectors. I've just enumerated a few here. The administration, this is essential in this specific field. We need to work with the administration so as to progress, as Martí and Jean-Paul were talking about, for regulation to grow. We have entities such as universities, professors, companies, from SMEs up to larger companies, and we can work all together with common goals. This is very similar to the pole in Extremadura. He said that he's open to linking poles or hubs. So I would like to say the same thing. We're motivated to do that. And this is the idea that motivates us behind all of this. And here you have like 4 bubbles. The large one is research. For us, this is key. With no research, we do not progress. And this crop, it is advancing very quickly. So we need tools to research and to move forward together. We also have business. We're talking to businesses because businesses need to make business. It's part of their work. So we have different companies from different areas, and if we group them all, it will be good to have joint projects with them, with companies from abroad, researchers from here, and also from abroad. This is what we want to create with this hub. We have talent. We are a university with lots of talent, and we also want to encourage other universities to participate. We want to create a community where we can all work together so that all of these bits and pieces that you can see here can be boosted at its fullest. And when we have knowledge, we can innovate. But if we do not innovate, knowledge doesn't make sense. So everything is interlinked, and it is important to see how everything is interrelated. Over here, you have some of the ideas that we were talking about. And this is very similar to Iker's presentation, but there's also this lobby part. If we all reach an agreement, if we all agree on the main challenges, main solutions, if we work together, it will be better to move forward. We have technological research challenges, as Iker mentioned, but science, when it is done jointly, it is always better. And this is the idea. And then we have lots of services linked to that. He just mentioned a few. But if we work jointly, we can do larger things, European projects, different operational teams. We're talking about projects, services. Companies can offer services to other companies, both from inside or outside the university. If we feel comfortable in our sector, we can offer more services to companies inside, both inside and outside. So the objective is to have common goals. We mentioned that the hub is fitting the needs of the different companies, and this also happens. This is an example where each partner or member which is part of this hub, we can all have different needs, and they might want to focus on different topics. For example, I want to focus more on innovation or training, or I'm just interested in services. So this is just an example to demonstrate this. We haven't talked much about this, but I think I should mention it, and we could talk about it in the roundtable. But we're lacking specific training in this sector. We have agronomy experts, and we have people who have been trained. But because of the complexity of this crop, we need more training on technical issues. So this is one of the objectives. We need specific courses to talk about these technical issues linked to this crop. And basically, this is it. I would like to have some time for the round table afterwards. This is my email. If you're interested in the hub or the Meta Hub, you can get in touch with me. I will be very happy to get your proposals. And basically, this is it. We will move on to the next item on the agenda. It is a little bit different. Since we are here in the field, it would be good to touch and smell the plants. We have Ruben here. He's an agronomist, industrial engineer. He's been working in BioVid, a multinational company focused on this sector. And since 2017, he's been participating in several companies. Balenveras and Canaveras are two of them present in this event. And he will tell us about what we're growing here. Why do we have these crops, and why are we experimenting here in Agropolis? Ruben, you have the floor.
Hello and good morning. Thank you, Joan, for that introduction. My name is Ruben Balenveras. I'm here to tell you about the experiment that we're doing at the Agropolis and our future perspectives. So I hope to be able to sum that up in just 15 minutes and how we are conducting this study. I wanted to tell you what Balenveras company is about. We are a group of young entrepreneurs, biologists, agricultural engineers, and developers of ideas. We are attempting to develop technologies to improve the quality of hemp crops and industrial cannabis. We have a line of research designed to improve the characteristics of the industrial cannabis crops, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later on. But let me take advantage of the fact that we're here in the field to tell you about the studies we've done up to today and the things that we may study or carry out in the near future. Let me say that I've been fortunate enough, as Joan has said, to work in the research of industrial cannabis for several years now, thanks to Jill Gorge and the entire UPC staff and faculty. I studied there, and I'm now an agricultural engineer. And with BOD, we began to study the different characteristics of hemp crops as opposed to electroconductivity, or in terms of electroconductivity in the soil and water, and their impact on the quality of fiber, seeds, and cannabinoids, and how the electroconductivity may have an impact on that. We continued to study, and we were interested to pursue the study in the development of biological products. So we looked at the influence of pH on all of this. So in the past 2 years, compiling all the information, all the technical information that we have done with these studies, that is what that has been done for. Now, I'd like to tell you more a bit about this study and some of the questions and unknowns that we are working with. As I said, our first mission is to improve the industrial characteristics of hemp in its growth and production. Obviously, all these varieties are registered varieties well within the regulatory framework of the EU. They all have less than 0.2% of THC. As you can see, they are all clones, and that's why they are all females. Fortunately, a company helped us providing clones, in this case, of a registered variety, and that's why they're all females. Why use clones? It's very important for us to study the bioviability of the crop and see how we can study all these characteristics without having biovariability of the seeds. And since they are all females, we're able to do that. When we work with clones, and we work with clones in all of our studies, that way we ensure that the variability of the plants is very low and the seeds are all the same. When we study the plants, we have the same plant that we can repeat and therefore study, in this case, with the different crop growing techniques. And what have we studied? We received a number of questions and from consultants, and when we do studies, we ask ourselves a number of things about the crop, but until you have them in the field and study them, you can't really answer the questions. The first question is, when should we begin to grow? How? And is there a technique that can improve the quality of fiber and seeds of the plants? What we did was to come up with 3 large study groups in this field. One is planted there to my left, where we planted at the end of June. These are the largest plants. Then another plantation in the middle at the beginning of June, and another one, which is where we are now. That's why the plants are smaller, at the end of July. Cannabis is a dioic plant. As I say, all these are female, so they're monoic. And what we want to see is the useful surface that we could use for this crop. How could we inform all of those that wanted to grow industrial cannabis the proper amount of space and the proper amount of time to optimize the crop? Now, I'll tell you a bit more about the technique that we've used. And here, as we're in the field, let me show you that we have the 3 groups that I mentioned, 3 different plantations. And we have focused on a combination of a control plant, the clone just as it comes to us, another one with an apical pruning applied, and apical pruning and low pruning, another group. Why have we done it this way? The plant has different hormones that generate different contents of cannabinoids, and the different content of fiber can also change depending on the structure of the plant. When we prune the apical part of the plant, we make the branching different, and we can study different characteristics that have to do with the productivity of the industrial hemp. I'd like to show you a bit more about the technique and how it was done. This crop is still in process, so to speak. The entire process has been scientifically demonstrated. We will publish our results at the UPC Diàlegs website. For anyone interested in the agronomical study of this, the results will be duly published. And what we're trying to determine is what kind of generation of industrial product we have with these pruning techniques. So let me show you now, if you don't mind, the technique we've used. It's a technique commonly used in these crops. And basically, as I said, we have 3 plantation groups and studied what kind of plant has variation depending on apical pruning, low pruning, or high pruning. I must also mention that we've been fortunate to have sponsors for the study and the seminar, thanks to Bioland, the company that has helped out with our biological struggles, and they have assisted us a great deal with plagues and pests. And this is very important for our studies. If we have a problem with pests, it might invalidate the entire study. Therefore, it's very important for us to control pests and plagues. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor for providing these clones that ensures homogeneity throughout the crop and our ability to have a valid crop for the study that we wanted to conduct. So these would be, if we were to divide the 3 groups, we have 3 plants that are exactly the same. They are clones. And what we did, as I said, we have one plant that's a control plant, and with an apical pruning in the group 1 plants, the one that receives the apical pruning, at the upper apex, we cut off the upper part and allow the lateral branches to develop differently. Therefore, the fiber and content of cannabinoids is going to be different. And in the control 2 plant, we have apical pruning and low pruning. Low pruning is commonly used to remove the lower branches that often get degraded due to weather and contact with the soil. They end up being degraded. And as we're running short on time, let me tell you a bit now to finish about our future. Our collaboration with UPC, we want to talk about our future intentions in terms of development. As Jill has said, and we know, industrial hemp has a multitude of applications. Therefore, it's important for us to develop applications to improve the crops and the processing of the plant. And that is why the operating group has received some aid to develop technology called NIR, in Spanish, spectroscopy, or near-infrared spectroscopy. It is something that allows us to do the biochemical analysis of the live plant and the end product to study the qualities of industrial hemp and all its derivatives. We have three main groups we want to study. The seed. We want to see the germinating properties of the seed, the oil and protein qualities that the seed may have. This is something that we can study and determine the different components and come up with a model to properly study it on the plant and in the end product. Second, the fiber is another thing we want to study. As Jill has said, this is a great potential, and within the industrial hemp area, it's the most profitable area. There are many producers that are devoted to fiber production, and they can recover their investment and get profitability from their crops, which is not possible just working with the seeds. So it's very important to get the proper quality of fiber. And with this technology on the plant and on the end product, we can know the quality of the fiber, know the quantity of lignin, and the amount of chives or fibers that the plant itself has. And as I say, we want to study the plant in the same way. There's another applied technology for the near-infrared technology to know the optimum state of ripeness of the plant, depending on the time of the crop, and therefore be able to determine the time of harvest at the optimum moment. So that's just a brief overview of what we want to do at Valenverdes. I want to emphasize the need in society to see this crop as a very profitable crop, that it has many properties that make it equivalent or even better than oil, and consumers will drive the change for all this. And I encourage all of us to take a step toward the responsibility. After suffering this pandemic, we must support local products. Cannabis and hemp could be a solution for that. We know that our economic situation will soon be one of crisis. I call upon our authorities and lawmakers to do everything they can to help in the development of hemp to make for a better society and a better world. Thank you very much for your attention. And now let's move on to the roundtable discussion.
Te esperamos. Bueno.
Thank you, Ruben. I'll just wait for you. I would like to thank you all for your speeches. It's been very interesting. There's been quite a lot of debate. The network will try to answer to your questions. We have many questions, so we'll see. This is the first session on cannabis. We want to have one every year. This one is based on industrial hemp, so we're going to prioritize questions linked to that. And some others that we will not be able to answer, well, we'll answer them next year and so on. But we'll try to talk about everything. I'll start with some of the first questions. We've seen here the crops, the fields. There was a question linked to the license of the Spanish Agency of Medicine. Do we have a license for that? Could you clarify that, maybe? Yes, what we have here is a trial, an agronomic trial of different varieties of industrial hemp. They are all registered at the EU and also crop technology. We talked to EMS here and also the Agricultural Ministry, and they told us that for this kind of agronomic trial in industrial hemp, we didn't need a license for this. So we can do this with no license. Okay, thank you very much. Anything else you would like to add? Yes, the answer of the Spanish Agency of Medicine is the right one. It's not a controlled substance, so we don't need that because this agency is really regulating and controlling these controlled substances. Yes, when you say cannabis, everyone starts smiling, thinking that something is going to be illegal here. I think we've proven that cannabis goes beyond this. Yes, I would like to talk that the difference, as Jill said, between hemp and cannabis. It's the content of zero point 0.2, and there's also other countries, as Iker and other people said. For example, in Italy, it's zero point 0.6. And agronomically speaking, it would be interesting to be able to reach these levels. We already tried to increase these levels to zero point 0.3 to be more flexible. Even if it's industrial hemp, sometimes it is difficult to stick to these levels. And unfortunately, we could have a farmer of industrial hemp that could exceed these limitations. So I think it would be interesting to reestablish this legislation so that we could have right levels, because this zero point 0.2 level is very, very low, and we should be more reassured. Yes, from a point of view of a license, it is clear that the criteria of the Spanish Agency of Medicine follows the international legislation. It's the more restrictive criteria. It is true that the flower is controlled, but they stick to the 61 Vienna uncontrolled substance regulations. So even if it's more or less than 0.2, the flower is controlled, and it is not under the authorization of the medicine agency. But of course, the new applications of industrial hemp is different. Traditionally, we've been working on fiber and grain, but right now we're thinking about the use of active ingredients such as CBD, and it's also the use of, for example, a substitute complement of tobacco, because every time we're using this more along these lines. It's just one more use. For example, it is being used for plastic, oil, for construction, and there's also a social use of industrial hemp along these lines. There's some people and some European companies, because this is already a reality. There's even stores in France and in Italy. There's this specific legislation of 0.6. Switzerland, it is giving hemp to most of Europe, and it is 1%. So this is a contradiction, and we need to regulate this. But while this is not regulated, if we don't have this legislation, right now we're in a gray area. It depends on interpretations of the Agency for Medicine, and also it is up to the different tribunals, judges, and it depends on the different member states, because in some places they allow it, and in some other places they say, look, this is cannabis. I don't care about the 0.2 level. I'm going to size this crop, and that's it. So this 0.2 was, this level was placed with the agricultural help of the EU, because these crops were going to be financed. But some international and European and national institutions have mistaken this. And also underneath there is the struggle between, is it food, a complement, a drug, a medicine? And I think that there is this strong struggle. Is this food with other applications? Can I ingest this? Or is this a medicine? And this is what we're working on right now, and we'll see what the United Nations say about it at the end of the year.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to add that the flower is still present in the hemp plant. And if it produces seed, obviously there has to be a flower. I think this also generates debate. If growers just sell or export the biomass, that is the entire plant, the whole plant, it's as if the plant has a flower, it also has to be subject to control. If all the growers that are devoted to just seeds or grain, They would also need a license from the Spanish Medications Agency.
Along the lines of what Iker and my colleagues were saying, this excuse of the international agreements that they control the flower, well, the International Association of Controlled Substance, they haven't controlled Belgium, Holland, Italy, France, and many other countries that have regulated the commercialization of the flower. So this is not a problem of the international agreements because they do not set this limit of THC. This limit, as Iker, you've very well mentioned, has been set by the help that we have, that has been given to flax and hemp, and that's why we have to stick to this regulation. So the countries that have regulated the consumption of flowers, be it for smoking or other uses, well, this hasn't been denounced to these controlled substance agencies. So it's really a political will issue.
According to what I'm hearing, there's a legal problem, a law problem, but then in different presentations we've heard about analysis problems. We're talking about very low quantities, so the margin of error of the analysis may be more or less, but if it passes or not the threshold, the whole thing changes. You also talked about sample taking problems. How do you see the whole analytical issue? Is it an area of difficulty?
This is not a problem just here in Spain. In the States, they've been regulating this federally since 2018. And in 2019, they had a new regulation to control the total THC so that all of the laboratories were following the instructions of DEA. And the precision of the machine and the way of analyzing, you can have different varieties of patterns of the sample that you use. All of that are variations, and also the way in which we send the samples, that the producers send the samples. And then there's this regulation mistake of 0.2. For me, that doesn't determine the psychoactivity of the plant. So imagine this analysis can be done to measure 10 to 20 CBD or THC. So you have to check from 0 to 1%. You have this macroscopic analysis to have this 0.1, 0.2. It cannot be exact. And depending on the sample, depending when you're going to analyze this, you will think it will be 0.1 gram, but with ethanol, and then the machine intervenes there. I mean, there's so many factors there that I think that nowadays there's no 100% feasibility, and analyses are not 100% clear. We work with CETAES, and they have a specific license for the varieties that they analyze, but they also analyze industrial hemp. And right now, they have included this in an ISO regulation with a double blind in the sample taking, and every time the analysis is more exact. In the past, maybe CETAES was giving better or wider analysis results, but now they are more strict. They are one of the main laboratories, and this is a problem because they have ISO criteria, microscopic approach there, so the results are more problematic. This is a very strong debate, and it's not just linked to Spain, it's international.
I wanted to add, we were studying this with the standardized sample according to the EU protocol. We sent the same sample to different labs, EU labs and US labs, and we were surprised by the variability that they could have. There's the 17005 is the ISO norm. It specifies the protocol, but especially with 0.2, there's a very low threshold, and just the error of a person using the machinery, using the reagent at that 0.2 level, it's more than justified that there's a very wide variability at this level.
Yes, and also farmers do not know the exact efficient protocol of the sample taking. This is an information that they should have because they have this limitation of THC. So this should be a very easy to find protocols for all those producers who want to produce hemp. And this does not exist. We have to base our actions on European protocols or old protocols. Before there were 500 plants and now there's 30. But anyway, farmers are not well protected along these lines because the sample taking protocol is not standardized. So because of these variations, they might also have negative results.
But that problem comes from the new uses of hemp. If you use fiber, the framework for the crop is very different. It's very difficult for there to be a 0.2 threshold problem.
I think that's not true. The 500 plant average in hemp, well, the level could be below 0.2%, but you could have plants. I mean, the crop conditions, the temperature, that has an impact on the final content. So although there will be registered variables, everything will be legal, it could be possible that in a specific moment in time, you can have a registered variety that can exceed 0.2, even 0.3 THC levels.
In your thesis, in one of the analyses, you had levels even higher than that.
Yes, this was a future idea. We were focusing on 0.75, and then there was an improvement process. The THC content was very variable depending on the crop conditions. So now it's Futura 77, and we've done this to solve this problem.
2 years ago, we were studying the relationship between the electroconductivity, the quality of fiber in seed, and the level of cannabinoids. The cannabinoids are studied because of the limit of 0.2. As we made that consultation, they said as long as it's over 0.2, you can research it. So looking at doubling the level of C, the level of THC was doubled in the plants. Therefore, growers are a bit vulnerable. Aside from the lack of knowledge, if they don't have the capacity to maintain the proper level of electroconductivity, it's likely that they surpass this level and lose the entire crop.
If you deem it appropriate, we will move on to growers. A specific question and a generic question. I'll ask you both. Specific question. What are the existing varieties so that we can work without a license? Let's imagine a grower who wants to start without a license. And then a general question. Look, I'm a grower, and you've been telling me that hemp is very good, that there are so many possibilities, that it is profitable. I want to start. I want to change my tomatoes, my maize, and I want to switch to hemp. What are the steps that I should take? What are the main hurdles in this process?
The first question, you can grow the varieties that are included in the European catalog, the varieties of industrial cannabis or hemp. I don't know if there's been any new additions to that, but there are over 35 or 40 registered varieties that you can use. Therefore, the growing of these varieties is completely legal. Another matter is the final use that may be conditioned, but growing them that way is legal.
This is basically an issue of talking to the agricultural department of the region. It has to be a certificated seed. We need to have the purchase certificate, the traceability of the product, and we recommend to have the support of an agronomist that can control the crop. We have a declaration of the crop to the agricultural department, and it is important to talk about it to the city council too, and also the police station closer to the place, to avoid confusion, for them to know that this is not marijuana, marijuana crop, it is legal cannabis crop, and then the police then is informed, they know about it, and they will know what to do about it. According to the legislation, we need to control 5% of the crops. So every year, usually the agricultural department visits the crops and they do some sample taking. The sample taking cannot be done by the police. It's the agricultural department who should do this because they are the only ones that are sufficiently trained to know that that sample taking represents the totality of the crop. It should be representative. We should stick to the protocols of sample taking fixed by the UN.
At a more practical level, this is a problem that you face. The conductivity is a problem you face. It's important to analyze the soil, the water, and choose the varieties and production model that is best adapted to the place and the needs that you have for the end product. You have to take that into account.
A question linked to this issue. Can we do industrial hemp growth in dry land?
Let's hear from the professor. Yes, as I said, since 1970 up to 2006, all of the hemp grown in Spain was grown in dry farming, in the Frescal dry farming of the pre-Pyrenean, between 570 and 700 millimeters of rain per year. It can be produced in those areas, and even in some of the test years with rainfall of 125 millimeters during the crop cycle, we managed to harvest 5 or 6 tons of hay or straw. In dry farming areas, obviously, it would have to have some irrigation, but it is possible to do it in dry farming format.
Perdón, es que me están pasando algunas preguntas más de...
I'm getting here some new questions, and I think this is linked to what you mentioned. For example, I plant this and it's legal, but it's not always legal because there's some limits that cannot be exceeded. So I'm a grower, I plant a variety, I try to stick to the recommendation, and then in the analysis it exceeds 0.2. What should I do?
If your analysis comes back over 0.2, usually if it's a registered variety, it's likely that the samples haven't been properly taken. What the EU regulations say is that you have to retest with a more detailed analysis and determine whether there's any bad faith or action designed for the marketing of controlled substances. At no point does it say you have to destroy the crop unless that bad faith is confirmed. And you must remember that even though some plants may surpass the 0.2 threshold, if the plant is going to be used for fiber or biomass, the entire plant is going to be mixed. All the plants are going to be mixed, so the level of psychoactivity, the level of THC will be very much lower than 0.2%. Therefore, it's a matter of determining the end use of the product. If all of the product is going to be mashed up for biomass, where there will be fiber and all the other products and byproducts, all the parts of the plant will be mixed, and that's why it's completely legal in many countries of the EU, and that's why the Spanish producers are producing biomass to sell to companies that have licenses to make these end products.
But I understand that legally the industrial hemp production is aimed at biomass?
No, you can produce grain, you can produce fiber, you can use the entire plant. There's no limitation along those lines.
Fibers also linked to biomass. For example, there's an area where we have flour. The flour can be sent together with biomass to an Italian company. The Italian company cleans the flour and then he sells this flour to the Spanish company again. So we're losing so much money because we are selling this product, which is biomass, with a low cost to an Italian company, and then the Italian company sends it again to the Spanish company through this free movement of goods and products. So it is absurd that we can have this competition of other EU countries, and it's absurd to limit the business capacity of the Spanish entities because of an erroneous interpretation of the legislation.
We have another question. Why is there such a low presence of Spanish companies in the sector compared to other countries? Jill mentioned the number of hectares in France and other sectors as well. Is this a result of that?
Yes, this is one of the reasons, and also one of the reasons of the brain drain that Iker was talking about. In front of these difficulties of this erroneous interpretation of the regulations, they decide to invest in other countries where regulation is more clear.
Let me go back to the agronomical matters. John Paul, I think this is for you. What phytosanitary products are approved? I think you touched on this difficulty in your remarks.
Yes, we do not have phytosanitary products that are registered for this crop because there's no studies, for example, of safety periods pre-crop. So this has a good side and a bad side. The bad side, you cannot access them, you cannot use them. The good side is that you can do some extra management that is linked to more sustainable practice, such as biologic struggle, or, for example, planting in optimal conditions to reduce the risk of plagues and diseases. So this is the basis. We use techniques of organic crop and growth, and that's it, because we do not have registered phytosanitary products.
I would like to mention one thing. Industrial hemp is something that, among all the crops with the right level of profitability, requires the lowest level of phytosanitary products. It's maybe tomatoes or others that we could mention have a great need for phytosanitary products. These don't. It's another point in favor of crop growing of hemp. Were you able to hear me at all? Sorry for that. Had some audio difficulties there. As I was saying, very few phytosanitary products are needed, and that's wonderful. This crop requires very little in that regard. It needs good nourishment and the planting at the right time. You can really avoid using phytosanitary products, but it's not the case of many other products.
I have a question for me, but also for Iker. They were asking us about how to be part of this hub Cannabis. You can send me an email to my email, and I don't know, for your technological pool here in Extremadura, how can we get in touch with you?
It's a project we just began last year. We weren't sure what the format would be for that hub or a poll. I don't know how to call it. I'm from the Basque Country. But the important thing is that there be tools. We use them, and we are preparing the presentation with institutions, technological centers, and as of the first week of October, we'll be able to give you our email and contact information to begin those initial contacts. The first connection is coming as a result of this event. The first connection between Catalonia and Extremadura. That's very positive. And I think it's important because there are many people out there who want to do things, want to research and other things. We need to give them a framework. The university is fundamental for that. The academic world is fundamental for everything, but in cannabis and hemp, even more so.
Habéis hablado de la PAC.
You've been talking about the common agricultural policy in Europe. What about specific aid for growers?
Not at this time for the crops that was determined in 2003, 2004, or maybe 2006, a bit later. It's just another crop. And when you file your crop declaration, you just declare your surface area for hemp, and depending on that, you will get one or another subsidy, but it's not a specific one for hemp, just like there's not a specific one for wheat, for example.
Does this vary in other countries? Well, indeed, it should be the same in all of the member states.
I want to speak about the experience we've had in France. They take very much into account the CO2 sequestering for their crops. It's something that I think is very important with our environmental crisis that we're facing. The fact that industrial cannabis has a very significant CO2 sequestering potential. That is being taken into account in France, and with a hemp crop, you can get more financial aid from the EU.
In the agricultural department, they are asking about the density of the plantation to all of the hemp growers. And I thought it was because of the subsidies that they needed to plant specific amount of seeds. But now I don't understand why they are asking for this.
Y esto debería ser parte de lo que es el greening, ¿no? Si ambientalmente es favorable porque no utiliza fitosanitarios, por el aspecto que he comentado de beneficioso ambientalmente, ¿no? Pues aquí sí que cabe, y aparte de un marco general de la Unión Europea, que los países tengan un nivel de ayuda por esta parte ambiental. Aquí en España, que yo conozca, no hay ninguna ayuda, a diferencia de Francia u otros países.
Cualquier tema que os venga a la cabeza.
Any topic that comes to mind, please let me know and put it on the table. I'm just asking the questions from the media. Yeah, we need to talk about the cleaning capacity that cannabis has. It cleans the soil, it absorbs heavy metals. I'm from Majorca, and over there we have an area where we grow potatoes, and the soil is saturated with pesticides, heavy metals. So one of the possible applications would be to grow hemp for the industrial use, and we could use the cannabis plant to clean the soil. I think that these are elements that could also be financed. It's about suggesting projects, and administrations, I think they're open to this kind of projects.
Even with the cleaning of nitrates, it's such a growing problem and very current problem in this area. In our case, we do technical analyses before and after for nutrients in soil. We've realized that it is true. Hemp does absorb a great deal of nutrients, and if they're available, it does so in a very significant quantity.
I wanted to mention that when I finished my studies together with Bernat, well, I was lucky to study this benefit of the plant. We were studying different crops, and we wanted to see how many heavy metals the plant was capturing. And we saw a sector where they had been working in the metal industry, and there could not grow any crops there. And with industrial hemp crops, we could see that we could grow different crops in that area again, thanks to the hemp. So I think that's very interesting, also for the future, and also specific varieties for specific contaminations.
After, there's a new program for Fukushima, program with hemp to eliminate radioactivity from the soil. Yes, Chernobyl as well had that.
Another topic, it's very common, but it's very important, safety. We have a question linked to this issue. So the question is, recommendations for growers, for them to explain the thefts, what this is or not is about, to avoid some thefts and robberies. And regarding this issue, what do you think about this safety issue, and how do you think we could solve it?
I've experienced this myself. First of all, having an isolated crop, not very exposed to robbery. Obviously, there can always be robberies. There can always be theft. We always offer signs to post to explain what the crop is, so anyone who attempts to rob this, expecting to have a psychotropic effect, will be disappointed. But it surprises me. As Eco said, in Switzerland, they're the #1 producer in Europe without being in the European Union. It's probably because they have a level of security, because the law enforcement agencies have a very clear effectiveness. In our case, depending on where you work, you might not be able to control theft. As you said, Ruben, you could tell us about what happened just a few weeks ago to understand what we're really talking about. Well, one of the fields where we were working with the isolation and the fencing that we had, and the police told us that if the field isn't fenced, even if they found people inside the field, they couldn't detain them because that wasn't probative of them intruding illegally. So with the crisis that we've had, the economic crisis, the financial crisis, in my case, I've seen now the public safety has been affected. And there are many other problems in society that come before defending a field of hemp. So the best idea is to fence it off and to keep it as unexposed as possible.
Also, it is essential to give all of the documentation of the regulation to the police officers so that they know that this is not illegal, that this is a legal crop there. And then there's also an ambiguous process, which is the identification of the plots where this is grown. You know, they say that this is not psychoactive, you know, it's industrial hemp, but they see cannabis sativa, and people associate that to cannabis, and, you know, they don't get informed, you know, they just get in. It's not really what they're looking for, but this happens, they get in.
Here the solution is to grow a lot of hemp. When there are 3,000 hectares of hemp, the problem is over, because in traditional croplands, at first there were people who would steal a plant or two, but after they had stolen a few, they saw that it wasn't what they thought it was, and that was the end of the problem. The problem is that there's not increase in the cropland space. All the things you say is true, but the best solution is that this crop prosper and people have no incentive to steal it.
There should also be an effective regulation. Yeah, that's essential, because I don't know if this happens with other crops. You know, with tomatoes, there have never been deaths. But this year, you know, there was a person who died. He was run over. And this is linked to safety. People interpret and they misunderstand, and the economic resources are also involved there. And people go there to rob, to thief, and, you know, it's an economic problem. You know, it's not only a fence that you need safety, but who can pay economically for that kind of investment?
It's just not profitable to do that. As Eco says, it's a problem because since there is no regulation, there is no protection for the growers. Thieves may think that by stealing these crops, they may be immune to prosecution. This could be a strategic sector, one that generates a lot of revenue for Spanish companies. In Spain, we have crops of opium to manufacture medicinal opium, and they receive protection, and the Guardia Civil is very effective in defending those fields. So we should also talk about a protocol being created for law enforcement and the crops that have been declared at the time of harvest, that there'd be specific protocols to protect these growers, just like you would protect any other agricultural sector that was the victim of ongoing theft and violent acts. And the police is there to do that. There's not a clear regulation right now, a clear definition of industrial medicinal cannabis, so there can be organized groups, because if it's one small thief, that's no big deal, but other larger groups may try to mix narcotic cannabis with non-narcotic cannabis. Therefore, you can take marijuana and mix it with non-narcotic cannabis and cut it with this non-narcotic cannabis. I say this because it's something I've seen. It's not something I've just imagined. Some groups work this way, and that's why this violence exists. If there's violence, then there's a need for our Homeland Security departments to set up a clear protocol to support and protect the growers who work with these plants.
You've mentioned, and I think you're right, that the important thing is to have a growth in the sector and the amount of hectares grown. So we've been talking about the hurdles. Let's be positive. What are we missing, and what could we all do so as to have 3,000 hectares, companies producing it? I understand that there will be obstacles, but what can you think of?
First, to provide the sector with legal security. That's essential. It can't be that with the climate conditions, if it's over 0.2%, you have a perfectly legal crop, then you treat the grower like a criminal. Obviously, that is going to make anyone reluctant to get into this crop. And so one of the clear bases is a need for regulation. A regulation that is compatible and that with the interpretation of international conventions, and that also that the level of THC allowed be increased. If this hemp is not meant for narcotic purposes, it's not going to affect public health. And also that the UN protocols be complied with. And if there's a declared crop, the protocol not just be to determine the level of THC, but also the level of psychoactivity, because sometimes the CBD in hemp is higher than THC. Therefore, we would find a non-psychoactive substance, but that oftentimes the courts treat it as if it were a narcotic when it is not. And if there's not expert agronomists, engineers, and properly informed public, these people receive sentences as if they were criminals, as if they're treated like members of the mafia. And the mafia is who we need to fight against. It needs to be controlled and regulated like any other sector.
I focus on agronomy and crop technology, and the legal part, I think it's cumbersome, let's put it that way. But for me, there's like two parts to this. First of all, technological challenges that we need to overcome, but the legal side, the legal part, we need to clarify all of that, because if the legal side is not clear, then the crop cannot grow strongly, because these two things are closely interlinked. I know it's cumbersome, but we need to focus on the legal part too. And technologically speaking, I mentioned that in my presentation. I believe that one of the elements that should enable this crop to be competitive is basically the technological side. We need to be able to have modern mechanized technology to do fiber for textile quality, and this is something that we still do not know how to do, and that's one thing. And the other thing, is linked to the regulation. If this is such a good plant, environmentally speaking, etc., all of the environmental legislation should take that into account. So I would put it the other way. If we're interested in sustainability of agricultural production and hemp is not important, is that deep inside we're not interested in sustainability, because then these two things do not fit together. It should be an important crop because it has lots of environmental benefits, but there's two sides to this. The technological part, there's still some hurdles to overcome, and then the legal side.
I'll ask you in a moment, but there's another question. The Catalan Law 13/2007, how could that be recovered, they ask. Did that solve any of these problems? It's called the Cannabis Consumer Association Law, approved by the Catalan Parliament in 2017. Then an unconstitutional appeal was filed by the Partido Popular. And the Constitutional Court thought that state competencies were being invaded. Therefore, the law was repealed because it was invading the exclusive competencies of the Spanish state to regulate access to narcotics. At the time, the group in the government, the Socialist Party of Catalonia, and the Catalonia en Comú supported this in the Catalan Parliament. Now they could bring the bill forth again at the Spanish level, They said they would. They are not doing it. Maybe when you're in the opposition, it's easy to say these things, and it's harder to do once you're governing. But to offer some constructive criticism, the Catalan Parliament also said that it would resume all these social laws and re-implement them, and it hasn't done that either. So it's very difficult to believe in the political parties who say one thing today when they're not governing, and when they are governing, they don't do it. So the position from social sectors, civil society, universities, trying to enact these best practices and get this legislation passed as it is in other countries.
They're talking about a hub. Yeah, Iker. Well, there are some parallel lines in the industry of hemp and how all of this has evolved. And Jill, as you were mentioning, it is clear that there is a legal security issue that has to be solved. Otherwise, the sector cannot develop itself. But we also have the experience of the states. We have a federal regulation. It's easier. They do not have the criteria that we have here. You can extract it and sell it for pharmaceutical, cosmetic, or food reasons. But that first year, well, this was from 2018. So in 2019, the technological challenge determined 70% of the failure of the crop exploitations. And yeah, I don't think that we've reached 1,000 hectares in Spain. This is not even 1% of what we have in Europe, not even 5% of what we have in California, Oregon. So this is an essential challenge. Growers have an experience in crops, and I think that the crop side is good. But what happens afterwards? How do we transform and process that? And that's a super powerful challenge. The industry is not prepared. So this is like tobacco during the 80s when it exploded here. Right now it's a 21st century, 2020, but I think it's going to be difficult. That's my perception.
Obviously, the whole issue of technology and development of hemp processing is what's going to allow us to use it as a substitute for oil instead of using synthetic fibers, to use hemp fibers. As I said earlier, this can be used for blue jeans and even face masks. So I would call on consumers. And the industry has to change based on where consumers are heading. And so if people are interested in getting hemp blue jeans and hemp face masks, there will be more incentive to have hemp as a product. There will be more investment to have these crops and processing technology to get quality fibers. So each of us, for example, I sleep on hemp sheets. And this is something that we can all do.
That's one part. The other part is that we don't have a national association of hemp producers. It would be good if producers gathered together, because then they could stand for their interests, they could lobby the administration. But the way the companies are evolving, now those that are here in Spain, well, we need to analyze that too. But I mean, there's lots of different possibilities that might appear, but we need some time, you know. In some sectors, they've been fighting for 20 years. Well, here we don't have the recreational side, but anyway, we need to think about the special moment we are in right now. We are facing this health crisis and financial crisis. So there's an opportunity. There's a responsibility on behalf of the companies too, and also on behalf of the government. They need to listen to what's going on. But the experience, as Martí said, with our politicians, it's not very positive, you know, right now. They do not approve, but it's not just the politicians, it's the whole system, the way it has been designed, and the difficulty to elaborate all of this. Some political parties are supporting this. I think that even the Popular Party, the right-wing party, would support this if it's well supported, but we need to boost it.
I'd like to add, we're talking about the evolution of clubs, cannabis clubs. We're talking about industrial hemp. It's something we're all involved in. First of all, because of the environment, as Jill was saying. Number two, because any kind of consumption that we do can be of a biodegradable product, ecologically grown product that does not have a huge environmental impact. So we must try even harder to get that regulation to get consumers who want these products to change the course of mankind on the planet.
I would like to briefly say, along the lines of what Dicker and Ruben were saying, is that the political parties, in face-to-face meetings, they all say that they would regulate this. But you know, afterwards is different, because, for example, if the left-wing party presents this, then the right-wing party will go against it, Many times we're focusing on just a few political parties, but we should say you shouldn't make politics with public health. Everyone should agree on this. You should all agree on this, and you should launch a common initiative where we do not need to see someone who benefits or loses from this, because this is about protecting public health. There's millions of people who want to consume. They have the right to do that, and they have the right to control something, to consume something which has good quality, which is not controlled by the black market. The Catalan police presented a report not long ago saying that the black market is huge, and that there is even policemen involved in narco-traffic red networks. So we need to have a protection of all of this, because otherwise we are just going to give the power to mafias. And this has happened here and everywhere and during all history. So we should learn from these mistakes.
Okay, we'll be finishing up. I think everyone's feeling great out here, but it is a bit warm. But I would ask you to look into your crystal ball and tell us, one thing is what we want to do, and another thing is what's going to happen. So where's the market headed? What should we call on each other to do? If we met in 5-10 years' time, what would we say? We have better regulations, we're still the same, we have hemp blue jeans. What would be the scenario?
I can start. I wish that in 5 years' time we could all come here with our hemp clothes and also vehicles with hemp technology. It would be good if we could have help or subsidies, taking into account how powerful this plant is with the environment. And it would be good to overcome the stigma of cannabis and hemp. It would be good if this were a plant which is accepted, a revolutionary plant in society.
I'll be optimistic. In some years' time, cannabis or hemp crops will be widespread in Spain and worldwide. It's a trend that can't be stopped. The industry is well ahead of the regulation. The World Health Organization itself has made a statement that CBD is not a narcotic substance, is not a public health threat. And the European Commission is also working to, shall we say, make it believe that it's going to be controlled as a narcotic and they won't be able to. That's all a smokescreen to get companies to not advance to a point where there's no regulation. So it's unstoppable. The sooner Spain establishes an attractive legal framework that can attract foreign companies and allow the development of domestic companies, it's one of the we're one of the most important agricultural growers. We're one of the leading legal and illegal cannabis growers in Spain. The hashish that comes from Morocco comes through Spain. All of this movement has to be regulated. It's of interest to society and for public health. So I don't think we're too far away from proper regulations, and we must all lobby for that to be a reality.
Yes, this crop should be like any other agricultural crop. And we shouldn't see this lack of protection. And we need to have a regulatory framework so that all of the growers can be more reassured, and for us just to have technical hurdles, but not other things such as thefts, etc. So I hope that in 4 or 5 years, I hope even less, this will be the case, and we can all be more reassured.
If we are all wearing hemp clothes in 5 years, using hemp oil, then I'm sure that means that there's production and development behind all of that. In the case of the fiber development, necessarily, there has to be demand for that. But true that there are many actors involved in this development, and the development won't be complete until there's significant demand. That doesn't mean we can't do anything before that time. Machinery is being developed for small growers to use. That might be a first step. It's a bit of a catch-22. If there's no demand, there will be no supply. But it might be a way to start with that demand, the small growers. And in the end, if that demand exists, then the industry will be developed behind it.
Please allow me, when we talk about agriculture, it's always about this. If the proximity product demand were higher, we would have other problems in agriculture too. You know, we always present hemp as a different thing, but it's just one more crop. We have this problem with lettuce, with tomatoes, with everything.
Well, I think we've debated quite a bit, but I agree with Martí that the trend will be toward more regulation. There hasn't been a world war this spring, but something similar to it. The world is going to change after this pandemic. And there's a significant lesson in all of this. We are destroying the planet. We must be more responsible. Hemp is an opportunity to be responsible in a big way. And not just hemp, but the whole trend of greening that we're seeing in Europe. We must make the most of that, and hemp is an opportunity in that direction. I believe in comprehensive regulation, but the reality is the system is much more solid than it appears, and we have to work to make sure that still is the case. But in the overall system, hemp is something of a gray area, and we need to work to change that. That's why I feel optimistic.
Well, I wanted to finish on a positive note, so if you don't want to add anything else, we'll call it a day. I think that many ideas are clear. A clear idea is that we need regulation, so this is homework for regulators. We need to regulate first. That's the first hurdle. So thank you very much again for being here. It's been very interesting. I've learned many things personally. I would like to remember people who have been following streaming maybe a little bit later. Well, I wanted you to know that we will have the 2 videos in the YouTube channel in Spanish and in English. So if you were late or if you want to double check something, you have the opportunity to see the whole thing again. I would like to thank the sponsors again, because all of these things involve money. If people help, we can do it. I would like to tell you that we have the Agrotech UPC channel, where we will be in touch with all of the speakers. So if there's any questions that have not been answered, we could continue there. I would like to thank you for your attendance, both face-to-face and virtually. There's 3 more conferences. We will start in January, because this has been very intense. We will talk about the food waste first, linked to Mercabarna as well. We will have another session on technology in general in the agricultural field. We are about to start a Grown Lab in the campus, where we will have free drones, and we will talk about the possibilities that we will have linked to this crop too. And since we are in Baix Llobregat area, and we've been talking about proximity crops and hemp, we will talk about the future of the Delta area and all of these hectares that we have here around us that unfortunately are disappearing, to see how we can tackle that. So thank you very much, and we will see each other soon.